The last big part of the Great Society is cultural growth. And what he wanted was a combination of not only aid for art and humanities, but also education. They would all go hand in hand. So, for example, the National Endowment for the Arts would be created to provide a little bit of subsidy for art, and same thing for humanities. And the big reason for this is most things, and the same argument would be for a partially subsidized TV called public television. Originally, it's going to be almost all funded by taxpayer money, but then during the Nixon administration, they cut it back dramatically. Republicans have been trying to get rid of NPR and PBS since the beginning. But the whole idea of it was, with a little bit of subsidy, it wouldn't have to go to the lowest common denominator, art. They could actually have the concept of art more for cultural growth and not just simply to sell stuff. Because selling stuff always leads to the lowest common denominator. You don't believe me? Watch any television show. Yes. Why do they want to get rid of it? The biggest reason is because they see it as government intrusion in the marketplace. If the market doesn't want to have art, they won't buy it, so don't have it. And they just don't like it. It doesn't fit in with social Darwinism. But Sesame Street came out of this. I, right here, watched the very first Sesame Street. You really? Yeah. You like it? I don't know, it's 48, I don't remember much. But I thought it was a little bit, it was over my head. It was so complex, that big bird, and why is this green thing living in the garbage can? It made no sense. I had a very logical mind as a 48-year-old. Okay, so, and one more thing to aid for education. And this is the first large-scale aid for education outside of what happened after Sputnik. And some of it was flawed. They put way too many strings attached to it. I mean, there's problems with the federal aid for education too, which there's huge problems, I would argue today, with the priorities of it. But the idea was that government has a role in education and for college. And Johnson, too, had the plan for free public education, including college. But like I said, he just tried to get many bills passed. So what he got passed were student loans and Pell Grants. And Pell Grants would provide aid for people at or near the poverty line, and then loans for everybody else. The problem with loans is this. Loans do nothing to curtail the growth of the cost of college. If everybody goes to college and can get a loan to pay for it, what does that do to the cost of college? It goes up. So you combine that with, in the 70s, cutting education, partially out of a conservative idea that it's wasteful government spending, and partially because they want to get people into debt. That was the plan. Combined with student loans, it had the exact, probably wrong outcome. And that is why today the average student, so the average college debt for a graduate is about $30,000 a year, and that's going up exponentially. Yes?
What was the poverty line at this time?
Poverty line at this time, in '64, it was about 25%. But with the war on poverty, it's eventually, by the early 1970s, it would go down to around 10%, just below.
What is it right now?
Right now, about 18. Yeah, we pretty much, as a country, abandoned the idea of it, of stopping poverty. Not pretty much. No one ever talks about it. And then when people rise up in impoverished places like Baltimore, people are like, they just must have bad fathers or something. You know what the life expectancy in the areas of Baltimore that had the heaviest rioting, so to speak, last week? Does anyone know life expectancy? 19. 19. I want you to think about that for a second. Yeah, that's lower than Somalia. I just want you to ponder that for a little bit. Then I wonder why they might be upset. Why there might be some anger, and irrational anger, right? So, there's Johnson. And Johnson was riding the wave. Okay, he needed to find his own way, though. You can only yell with dogs so often in the Oval Office, and or give beagles to children. I mean, how many baskets of beagles can you possibly have? And to be honest with you, that is not a long-term plan. And what about beagles? Yes, they love to be held by their ears. Everybody knows this. Little Beagle Johnson won like that. Okay, so, but how he got the bills really passed was not by torturing beagles. It was by the Johnson treatment. And the Johnson treatment would be how he would use his ability to threaten, cajole, promise, manipulate, lie, to get things passed. And he's a big man, big ears, big nose, big hands. He just could get right in their face. There's no personal space with Johnson. He got right up in your face and you couldn't escape. That's how he got things done. How tall is he? About 6'3½". And he weighed about anywhere from 300 to 200, depending on his mood. I'm not kidding, he really fluctuated. And this is a good example of the Johnson treatment, so I'll share this very quickly. So here's the initial talk. That's a Senator Dick James from, Richard James from Mississippi. And this is actually when he's Senate Majority Leader, but this kind of stuff is rarely shown because it's done in private. So here he is, beginning the talk. It's about the Civil Rights Act of '57. And then this is the threat. He gets these big ham-hock fingers and he jams them in there and throws the mouse on the ground. And then, and he would pick people up by their lapels, get right up in there, I don't want to do this. And then becomes the beg, or the, where you're getting, you have to do this. Now, I love this. He's against the desk. So he's like, and then the wait. When he's done, he could stand like this for, well, I'm not about to say hours, not hours, but 10, 15, 20 minutes and just stare at you. It was hard to say no. I will tell you the great story about the segregationist governor of Alabama, George Wallace, about the Selma and Montgomery March. I'll tell you that story after the test. It's a good one. Everybody but Megan, I'm going to make Megan, because I saw your face, and you're going to be out there. No, you're going to be in the window watching everybody enjoy the story, but you can't hear it. Ha ha! So the election of '64, Johnson wants to win on his own. Johnson wants to win and not have the stigma of being Kennedy's vice president. He needs it on his own. His running mate would be Hubert Humphrey. Yes, he made Humphrey dress up like this too on the horse. Hubert Horatio Humphrey, LBJ and HQ. Yeah, that's what it was. He was the liberal senator from Minnesota. He, more than any other single person, got the Civil Rights Act of '64 passed. Humphrey was a giant in liberal politics. Kind of had a high voice. Pleased as punch to be here. I suppose I get to Humphrey, and you're going to think that sounds just like him because I know none of you have never heard Humphrey, except for Alex. So I love this one: scientists and engineers and physicians. I just for some reason that makes me laugh. And what Johnson had a big advantage because Barry Goldwater of Arizona got the Republican nomination, and they called it a conservative insurgency. The conservatives have been mad since '48 in the Republican Party, and this time, through very clever planning, marketing themselves, infiltrating the convention, they got their man, the ultra-conservative Barry Goldwater, who claimed that virtually everybody else was a communist. And he would begin the Southern strategy. And they put this idea that we are LBJ, you get a choice, not an echo, like those liberal Republicans, which of course is not quite true. And, yes, there it is, AUH2O, science. So, these are the elements of the conservative insurgency. First off, Elvis.
It's really not too
Desperately anti-New Deal, especially Social Security and unions. Well, on the tax rates. Okay, they just hated the New Deal. Get rid of the New Deal. Get rid of Social Security. Now, it's hard to get rid of Social Security because so many people like it. So they try to find, undermine it. They haven't been able to do it yet, but they're getting close. Next, anti-union, which is part of the New Deal. Their biggest enemy was, his biggest enemy was Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Workers, the man who is probably more responsible than any other person for the March on Washington in '63, except for King. And then, but they want to break unions, cut wages, because they're conservative. Remember conservative economics? That's trickle down. Next, anti-commie, convinced that the Red Menace is coming up the street out to take us. And Goldwater was convinced that we could fight a war and win it. He talked a lot about weapons. He was in the Air National Guard. He's obsessed with weapons. He would talk casually about lobbing an atomic bomb into the bathroom of the Kremlin. Casually. I don't mean like, well, we have to. No, he said, well, we should do this. We should. We should drop atomic bombs on Beijing. We should drop atomic bombs on North Vietnam. Very casual. And for reasons I didn't mean to write anti-civil rights, but actually it kind of worked. You know, that's the negative. Wouldn't anti mean pro-civil rights? Yeah. But that would have shocked his supporters. Anti-civil rights. And these anti-civil rights, now he voted against the Civil Rights Act. It wasn't a big deal for him personally. He opposed it because his big deal is business should be allowed to serve whoever they want. But whenever he would give a speech and talk about the commie, get a few cheers. And it's more like talk, it kind of scared people. But when he would bring up, we have to stop the Civil Rights Act. They're coming for you. We need states' rights. States' rights was a code word for anti-civil rights. States' rights, states' rights, states' rights. That's what got the cheers. That's what got it. That became the essence of the Southern strategy. In fact, they saw it as a Trojan horse. And Democrats never figured this out, much to their, well, actually fallen. They used this as a way to get in the office to get rid of this. And it worked. Worked really well. And then this idea that values were falling apart. That because of Democrats and liberals, American values are falling apart. How do we know that? All I gotta say is that rock and roll, right? The rock and that rock and roll, and it had a racist undertone to that because that was black music. This is a really, you know, no one likes to talk about it, but we were pretty racist, and that became the Southern strategy. '68, Nixon would use it great. In '72, he became a master of it. Ronald Reagan was a much more charismatic version of this, but Reagan did it too. Reagan announced his campaign in 1980 on purpose in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to talk about states' rights. Everybody knew what it meant, but why Philadelphia? Because 4 civil rights workers there were lynched, and everyone knew who did it. It was the police and a couple members of the Klan, and they weren't arrested. And he did it there on purpose. He's making a statement. That's the Southern strategy. It's very divisive, but it's very effective. And we're not going to have time about this, so let's move to the Tonkin Gulf. What? You can watch it on your own. But here's the thing. LBJ then realized that if I can push or make Goldwater seem like the extremist, which he was, today he'd be actually a liberal Republican. I'm not kidding. There's no liberal Republicans left today. I mean, really, it's a different party. It's a different world today. But if you can make it seem like an extremist and somebody's going to cause World War III, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis just happened 2 years ago. That's fresh in everybody's mind. I can win, but he's got to look tough, and that means South Vietnam. August 2nd, 1964, a U.S. destroyer, the Maddox, was hit in the Tonkin Gulf. The Tonkin Gulf, it was right off the shore of North Vietnam when it was hit. Now, the U.S. said that North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked unprovoked, and they did attack. Now, they kept it secret that the Maddox was actually firing on North Vietnam, aiding a South Vietnamese commando strike. That was secret. So unprovoked. Yeah, that's unprovoked. By definition, that means unprovoked. Well, in fact, those are the torpedo boats taken from the Maddox. This happened. The Maddox was just had a couple minor hits, nothing big. Johnson, many of his advisors said, you got to attack. But Johnson didn't want that commando attack coming out. So Johnson sent the Maddox and another ship, the Turner Joy, back 2 days later. Oh, wait, why's that there? On a second mission. I'll get into McNamara in just a second. And they, no commando attack. And they reported the night of August 4th, we're under attack. There are torpedo boats everywhere. There's 1, 2, soon 50 torpedoes in the water. They're firing. In fact, the Turner Joy almost shot at the Maddox. This massive attack. So think about it. By radio to the Philippines, to Hawaii, then eventually to the Secretary of Defense. Robert McNamara. McNamara was Kennedy's Secretary of Defense. He was considered the most competent man in Washington, D.C. He was one of Kennedy's best and brightest. He stayed on with Johnson. Johnson called him his lard hair man. I think you can see why. He was former president of Ford. They called him a walking computer. And McNamara told Johnson, now we got to strike. Now it's time. But then it came back to McNamara from the Turner Joy and the Maddox. We're not sure. Maybe there aren't any torpedoes in the water. We don't know. McNamara sat on that information. He didn't tell Johnson. Johnson came on national TV and ordered that the U.S. bomb North Vietnam. It later came out that almost certainly there was no second attack. Those guys had some faulty radar signals and panicked. But Johnson insisted there was an attack. Later on, Johnson would say those sailors were shooting at a bunch of damn flying fish. But they went to Congress and said, we were attacked. Here is the newspaper that shows the attack. By the way, do you remember what I told you about the 4 civil rights workers? Those are 3 of them. They found the bodies at the same time. All this stuff is happening at the same time. It's just weird. You can't see Vietnam without looking at the civil rights movement. But Congress passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. Right after, Johnson had this bill ready, gave it to him. And what it did is it gave the president a blank check to stop aggression in Southeast Asia. It said the president can stop aggression in Southeast Asia in the way the president sees, a blank check. Now, Johnson wanted this to look tough in the election of 1964. So he could say, I did limited bombing, I didn't blow up the world like Goldwater would have done. I got this Tonkin Gulf Resolution, but I'm not causing World War III. Make sense? I'm the moderate who wants peace. But the Tonkin Gulf Resolution would be the justification, the congressional justification to go to war. Of all the members of Congress, every member of the House and all but 2 members of the Senate voted for it because they believed what Johnson said. This is going to become important because it's going to come out that Johnson lied. And there's a lot of lies going on. The Johnson treatment is based on lies. And it's going to lead to a credibility gap in government. Pretty soon people aren't going to trust government anymore. They're just not going to trust them. And this would tie in very nicely with the conservative resurgence of the 1970s. But out of this is going to come the most famous television ad in history. Johnson only showed it once during his campaign, but it would be shown on news programs and everybody talked about it. It's called the Daisy ad.
1, 2,
Everyone's feared.
3,
Goldwater's finally casual about it. Isn't
5,
she?
7, 6,
Oh.
6, 8, 9, 10.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Yeah, we must either love each other, or we must die. It played on everyone's fears. And Johnson got the victory he wanted. In fact, not quite. He wanted every vote, but still got the biggest popular vote victory in history. Almost 62% of the vote swept through the Electoral College. A landslide for Johnson. People talk about that the Republican Party was dead. Conservatism has failed. But look. Okay, Arizona makes sense, right? That's where Goldwater is from. For the first time since Reconstruction, these states voted for Republican. Why? Civil rights. The Southern strategy. And they barely tried it in '64. I mean, it's just kind of a haphazard thing. Works. And that is going to become the basis of opposition, the Southern strategy. And that is why today the Republican Party is a Southern party. The leaders are Southern. Big deal. And almost immediately, Johnson rolled into victory. We're winning. Everything's going great. But Vietnam, I mean, right after the inauguration, they're talking Vietnam. South Vietnam is falling apart. Falling apart. And two huge Viet Cong attacks after this. The biggest one will be at a place called Pleiku, which is in central South Vietnam. I know that sounds weird, but that's what it is. 100 American airmen were killed or wounded at this base they're operating for the South Vietnamese. This is looking at the base. That is actually National Security Advisor Mick George Bundy. Yes, his name was Mick George. Looking at it. But what do we do? Why is this such a big deal? This happened just when the push for the Voting Rights Act happened. Just when the push for the Voting Rights Act. And then, at the same time, one of the growing leaders, and at first he was a black separatist, but he would become much different. A man by the name of Malcolm X, you see him there talking to Martin Luther King, was becoming a more vocal leader of the civil rights movement. And he was assassinated. This is all happening at the same time. Voting Rights Act, Malcolm X, Pleiku, huge electoral victory. Now, Malcolm X was almost certainly assassinated by leaders of the Black Muslim movement. He had a break from them. He originally was part of it. But this seemed like, this had this feeling like the civil rights movement either is going to get too violent or people are trying to stop it. It had this feeling of an explosion coming. Yes, go ahead. The X? Yeah. Because he changed his name, and the X is because since he had his name changed as a slave, or descendants, he doesn't know his real name. So we take it as X. Pretty interesting man, an amazing guy in a way. And there's a movie called X. It's okay. That Spike Jones was a big fan. Spike Jones, Spike Lee did. And anybody want to guess the actor who played Malcolm X? Denzel. Yeah, Denzel Washington. Looks just like him, doesn't he? So, in response, Johnson decided, I need to look up on communism. I need to make sure that my anti-communist flank is protected. Now, this has nothing to do necessarily with Vietnam. He's thinking domestic politics. And they started Operation Rolling Thunder, which is sustained bombing of the North. It began in 1964 and would go on until 1968. And the plan was, this is actually near the end. This is an F-4 fighter. They weren't around yet. What the plan was this: bomb just a few targets in the North. Convince the North to go to the peace table and accept South Vietnam. Has everyone got that? This is not going to be a massive bombing. They don't want World War III. So it's limited. The civil wars in the South. They think if we just bomb a few targets, we can win. The problem is, Ho Chi Minh and the North, they've already fought the French. They've been fighting for years. They won't want Vietnam. We didn't understand that. The Vietnamese wanted Vietnam, not two. And there's one more thing that's really important. China's right up here. Remember, just a decade ago, we fought the Chinese, and they just exploded their own atomic bomb. World War III looked big. Johnson stayed up late at night, couldn't sleep, worried about every American soldier that might die, and World War III. When people look at Vietnam, and there's become a myth in the 70s that the U.S. did not use enough force, which I find fascinating, but they don't understand that it's World War III. But to give you an idea of the size of Rolling Thunder, just the bombing of the North in 4 years dropped more bombs on North Vietnam than the Allies did on Germany in World War II. And this is supposedly limited bombing. Does everyone get that? This is supposedly limited. Don't worry. Where is most of the bombs going to go? The South. But once we have air bases, we can't have another play coup. So Johnson was convinced we got to send in some forces to protect air bases. So in northern South Vietnam, at an important base, the Marines came in. The Marines were sent in to Da Nang. And they literally hit the beaches. They had landing craft, and they came charging on the beach like it's Okinawa. And they were met by smiling young Vietnamese girls with flowers. That's really weird. It was just a weird thing. But now U.S. forces were there. And what do you think the Marines were there? They dig in around an air base. The Viet Cong start lobbing mortars on. What did the Marines want to do? Go get them. So Johnson begins to let them go out and get them. Did you see how escalation works? We send advisors. And then we have advisors in combat. Then we send pilots. Then we bomb a little bit. Then we bomb more. Then we defend the air bases. Then we go out and get them. Next thing you know, full-scale war. Every step. And at first it seems logical. Of course you need Marines there to defend the air bases. We don't want to play coup. Of course they got to go out and get them. Oh, there's not enough Marines. We got to send more. Next thing you know, it's war. Everything sounds logical. It always seems like you can stop it. You can't stop it. At least Johnson couldn't stop it. At the same time, the Southern Christian Leadership Committee and Corps organized a march in Alabama, Selma to Montgomery. And the police attacked them and brutally beat them. This is actually from the second march. The first march, it was a bloody mess. Martin Luther King was hit by a brick, severely hurt. They were attacked. The segregationist governor of Alabama, George Wallace, made it very clear, I'm not going to allow this to happen. And this forced Johnson to act. He's got to push for this Voting Rights Act, or it's going to happen again. There'd be another march and they would be protected. There was just a movie about this. Yes.
Oh yeah, I was going to see it.
I didn't see it. I didn't get a chance. I heard the movie was fantastic, except for one thing. They kind of make Johnson look like he was opposed to civil rights, and that's historically inaccurate. But I think they really want to show the bravery, the true bravery of the people who marched. I just wish they wouldn't have done that. But I gotta watch it. It's called Selma, right?
Yeah.
Did you see it?
I saw most of it. It was pretty good.
It's pretty good, but I had to quit watching because I got bored. No, I know you were working, so I heard it was really good. I'm gonna watch it. But this is the second march. I love Walter Abernathy right there. And this is the march, and now they're being protected. Johnson sent down U.S. Marshals, FBI agents, and soldiers to protect them. Wallace couldn't stop it. And Abernathy just reading the paper as he goes. I just love that. I like Abernathy. So, all at the same time, now Johnson comes out and says, we need a Voting Rights Act. We need this. So, he got to look tough on Vietnam. So, next. Oops. Robert McNamara, his Secretary of Defense, keeps saying to him, we can escalate. We escalate just a little bit.
and the North will give in. Okay, bombing, Rolling Thunder didn't work right away, a few troops. Now Johnson knew and was told it's going to take years and thousands of troops, but he wanted to believe we can do this so he could win. He didn't want to pull out in moves. And so by June, it's the big decision. They're saying we need more troops. Escalate or pull out. The Voting Rights Act is being debated at that moment, along with Medicare and Medicaid. Right at that moment, if he pulls out, they might not pass. Now, Johnson, what he should have done, hindsight's a beautiful thing. He should have said, we've won, and pull out. Right? He just won 60% of the vote. He's Lyndon Johnson. You're fine. Take it. He couldn't do it. Every one of his advisors, except one, agreed with McNamara. All these men. So Johnson accepted. Johnson very casually ordered an increase of 100,000 troops into Vietnam in June. War. And these are the reasons why in June. He didn't make it like, we are now fighting a war against tyranny and let's unify the country. No, it's like, we're sending units of the 1st Air Cavalry Division, helicopters. We're sending in units of, he just kind of said it that way. And we'll send units as they're needed. He didn't prepare the country for what Johnson was told. 500,000 troops, probably going to be a lot of people dead, and it's going to be years. We might not win anyways. How many troops did they send? Well, they started about 150,000, but it's going to take a while because they have to build the facilities. Yeah.
If he didn't pull out right then, what would the fallout in South Vietnam?
Who knows? There's no doubt that the government of South Vietnam would have collapsed and there'd be one Vietnam.
One Vietnam anyway, so.
And all we, so we don't know what kind of government would have been, so much had happened. And Ho Chi Minh would die in 69. So we don't know what he would have done in 65. But, 3 million Vietnamese are going to die in the next 10 years. Yeah, and almost 60,000 Americans. That was
The leader of the war.
who? Them. Ho Chi Minh was the North. Ho Chi Minh was the North. So, these are the reasons why. First, he thought he had to save the Great Society. He had to look tough on communism to save the Great Society. He had to. Next, JFK made this important. JFK's legacy. He was terrified that Kennedy's brother Robert would use this against him, which Robert Kennedy was already doing in 65, saying that Johnson's going to lose Vietnam. He's doing it all wrong. Johnson's biggest fear was to be the mistake between the Kennedys. He was just terrified of that. He figured Robert Kennedy, if this happened, Robert Kennedy would get the nomination in 68. Ironically, Robert Kennedy would come out against the war in 68. Kennedy was an interesting man. Oh my God, did Johnson hate him. And Kennedy hated Johnson. Next, credibility. If we're going to stop the commies in Eastern Europe and Berlin, remember Berlin? We got to stop them in Southeast Asia. Now, anti-communism is baked into the cake here, baked into the pie, so to speak. And lastly, he thought he could do it on the cheap. He kept thinking we just escalate a little bit more and get it done. So he kept the costs secret, thinking we could just shift money around. He thought this would also save the Great Society. People wouldn't realize the cost. But do you notice something? What's not in there? Civil rights. Okay, well, civil rights, Great Society. What part of Vietnam is not even mentioned? Does it say anything about the people of South Vietnam? Does it say anything about protecting the Republic in South Vietnam? Does it talk about health and welfare of the people of South Vietnam? South Vietnam was the bottom of the list for the reason why the United States ended that war. We cared very little about South Vietnam. This was politics. The reason the United States got it was not because we love the people of Vietnam. America has always been shoulder to shoulder. No. This is politics. It's doomed. Right then, they should tell, get out. You can't win.
Because we don't care that much about the South Vietnamese. No matter what's going to happen in 10 years, what are we going to do within 10 years? We're going to leave. We are going to leave. And we're going to lose. By the way, you could say something similar to that in Iraq right now. We're gone. We left. Afghanistan, we're going to leave completely. We already left once before in 1990. We're going to leave. So eventually troops came in. Escalation, it took a while to build up the forces. And one thing got to get down. Johnson made a conscious decision to not use the reserves and National Guard. He didn't want to break up families. And anybody who had relatives in the Guard or the reserves in 2003 through to today, families were broken up. They had to go fight because that's made up the reserves. Johnson didn't want that. So he's going to do it with volunteers. And for half the war, there were a lot of volunteers. They thought we're fighting communism. But more and more draftees. And this meant young men. Young men are going to be drafted. 18, 19, 20 years old. But it seemed to work. The three big bills he wanted passed: Medicare, which is health care for the elderly. Basically, the United States government becomes a single-payer insurer for health care for the elderly. In some ways, an incredibly efficient program. It is along with Social Security, is like the two tiers of government that can never go away. But also, there's some cost control issues because healthcare is just so expensive. But that's Truman there at the signing because he wanted healthcare, remember? Then he got Medicaid, which was a much more convoluted program, but it's healthcare for the poor. The reason why it's problematic is because every state has their own unique system. So there are some issues. Like, for example, Montana provides much better care than, let's say, Texas. And then Texas is infamous for providing bad, basically nothing for the impoverished. And then the Voting Rights Act. Here he is giving the pen to King there for the Voting Rights Act. So you see, the thing for Johnson was, hindsight, once again, it's wrong, but Johnson's thinking, it worked. It's working, right? I can't pull out now. But what happens if the war gets bad? Then the Great Society is going to be undermined. He's going to take a political hit, and eventually, the man who won the biggest electoral victory ever up to that time is going to have to drop out of the election in '68 because of Vietnam.
Somebody want a big one since then. Somebody want a big one.
Reagan was really close in '84. And so it depends if you look at the Electoral College or the popular vote.
So could he have done what he shared before now and say we won and then just leave?
Well, there's no way to know, obviously, because you can't prove something didn't happen. But
could he have done it at least?
I believe he could have. I believe he could have. Because there's certain things I don't like about Johnson, and there's certain stories I like, so I like him. But I admire one important thing about Johnson, and I can't help it. There are problems. And he was going to try to figure out a way to solve them and not ignore them. Or not hoping they would just go away. Or blame the people who are the victims. And so I respect it for that. I'm not saying every program worked. But I see this as a lost opportunity. But let's get to Vietnam then. That is General Westmoreland. And Westmoreland is the commander of American and Vietnamese forces. How do you fight an enemy that has been fighting for a long time, can blend into the population, and has resupply from the north? How do you fight them? And once the United States started sending troops, prom tickets, I want my cut.
It'll be for the rest of this week.
I want my cut.
You get free ticket.
Thanks. I think he's going to leave that AP exam but it's not Now I forgot what I was going to say. Why don't you people help me?
Westmoreland.
Oh, and that as soon as Americans started sending troops, North Vietnam started sending troops. Not as many, but they started sending troops. They matched. So there's going to be about 150,000 North Vietnamese troops. And they'll infiltrate into the south. How do you fight an enemy like that? That's eventually what's going to be. But they called it search and destroy.
They also called it spear and net, sweep and clear, and it's also called coin or counterinsurgency. Search and destroy. Send them in. Find the enemy. And that is a tunnel rat going into one of the thousands of Viet Cong tunnels they would dig to avoid Allied bombing. Some are still there. You can go into them and tour them, I guess, if you're not too claustrophobic. And they would send people in there to go root them out. And the thing about it is that strong units, the Viet Cong would go into the jungle and hide. And so they had to do either try to push them against something where they eventually had to fight, like another, push them into another unit, which was really hard to do, or send relatively small American units into the jungle and hope with what happened to them. Yeah, they get ambushed, which, by the way, is really bad for morale, isn't it? Hey, let's go get ambushed today. So they go through the forest and then use superior American firepower to blow them away and just destroy any area where there's firing. And then go through and do what? Count how many you killed. We killed 50, victory. That's how they knew they were winning. They called it body counts. And they would go through and count body counts. By the way, if you're an officer, how do you get promotion? Yeah, body counts. So you can imagine what's going to happen to a body count. What does a dead Viet Cong look like? Huh? Yeah, one might look like 30, and any Vietnamese is a Viet Cong, right, if they're dead, right? What if you see a blood spot? Oh, the blood spot. They pull the body away. That's 3. Oh, there's a big explosion there. I bet there are 15 there. Right? Then the body counts will get back to Saigon. They go from like 15 to 100 to 150. Pretty soon, their body counts are higher than the total number of Viet Cong. They would announce these at press conferences at noon in Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, and pretty soon reporters called them the 12 o'clock follies because they knew they were lying to. They called it like Alice in Wonderland, looking through the looking glass. Nobody knew what the truth was. Everybody's lying to everybody. No one has any idea except for those guys who are out there. They can't find them. And the casualties amongst the only about 10% of American forces were actually in combat were very high. Very high. But once you have that, they're hiding in the jungle. Well, let's get rid of the jungle. Ranch Hand would drop an herbicide called Agent Orange. And they drop millions of gallons of this in a program to get rid of the forest. You get rid of the jungle, the Viet Cong can't hide. Of course it didn't work. And this is highly carcinogenic. It's illegal today to use. Anybody it fell on, there's a really good chance of cancer, lung, throat, thyroid cancer. I guess it was really bad because of this. Any woman who was pregnant, they just dumped them on villages too. The babies would be horribly deformed if they lived at all. But they did it. The United States would not acknowledge that this was carcinogenic to the 1980s. And it didn't work. And then the bombing. It's called arc light. And arc light would basically, what they would do is kind of what Jamie said. They would designate an area on a map, just a square, and they would say, everybody in there is a Viet Cong or helping the Viet Cong. And then they would send heavy B-52 bombers that were designed to drop atomic bombs, but they were modified to carry 50 to 70,000 pounds of bombs. And that is a string of bombs from B-52. And they just would indiscriminately bomb, or napalm. They used thousands of gallons of napalm, which is jelly gasoline. And this bombing, 750-pound bombs can't distinguish between a civilian, a Viet Cong, or the family's cow. They can't decide. Do you remember the Southern strategy? A different one. In 1780, by the British in the South, with Cornwallis and the Guilford's Courthouse, and they went through the South trying to find the Continental Army, to root them out. They burned down homes and villages, creating more enemies. Think this is going to happen? I don't even want to tell you how awful the concussion from one of these bombs is. And then napalm, same deal. Jelly gasoline, can't tell the difference. But if there's fire from a village, here come the bombers. Here's another very famous picture from the Vietnam War. This is a young Vietnamese girl who's running away from a village who in the background has been burnt. These are South Vietnamese soldiers. They had been hit by napalm. Now, it's black and white, so you can't see it, but her clothes were burnt off. She had third-degree burns over about 80% of her body. She's in absolute agony. It just happened. So they're just singed off. Napalm can't tell the difference either. We should make smart napalm. No, and then today, the same thing. Smart bombs are more accurate, but they can't tell the difference either. Creating enemies. Well, while that's going on, Johnson got gallbladder surgery. And the only reason I'm showing you this is because you like to show off a scar. I also prove he didn't have a heart attack. He had a heart attack back in '58. And out of this is going to become one of the greatest cartoons of the Vietnam War era. The scar is the map of South Vietnam. You see it? What a clever cartoon. Yes, cartoonists had fun with the big nose and the big ears, didn't they? This also began, there was a growing anti-war protest movement. It was growing. And by the end of 1967, about 40% of the American population was against the war, even though some of those against the war wanted us to use nuclear weapons. But in 1967, there was a march on the Pentagon that had over 100,000 people. The movement was growing. And one thing that's very important for you to understand, the anti-war movement was made up of a cross-section of society. It was not hippies or drug addicts that would come about in the 1970s. Nixon would try to really use this well when he was president to portray them as. No, it was a cross-section of society. As you can see from this, there are all kinds of people joining, old and young, but since draftees were 19 to 20, you could imagine that would be a common year. And more protests. Johnson became more and more fearful of the anti-war protests. And then all hell broke loose. In 1965 it started and would go on through.
Hey guys, just one more reminder.
Hey, wait a minute!
$15 a piece. Tomorrow they go to 20. Buy them today.
That scammer. It's all for money. Yeah, when he's off, you'll see him off in the Caribbean when the Cayman Islands would put his ill-gotten good. Okay, so long got something, just very quickly. What happened was this. Urban areas, they called them the ghettos back then, but remember I talked about urban blight, how poor the cities were? They exploded in violence. And a lot of times they're going to be called race riots because a lot of times it would be young black men there. It's very similar to what happened in Baltimore now. Same kind of thing. They just erupted. That's Watts, which is one of the poor areas of Los Angeles. Happened in Detroit, Newark, all over. And they called these the long hot summers. And even though it baffled Johnson, he seemed to understand it. And the reason these happened, by the way, you know why I put this picture up? That's Baltimore. That's the same neighborhood that it was in last week. Same one. This is 68. You got to think things are so much different. No. And it's the same stuff. The unemployment rate there is like 50% today. But what happened was, because of the Civil Rights Act, I just want to get through this. Let me finish. The Civil Rights was passed, expectations were high, but they weren't met. The economy was still bad, and people were desperate. And so they protested. Martin Luther King looked at it very logically. Let me just show this real quick. That's what Martin Luther King said. These people felt ignored. They still were in bad shape, and that's how. All righty then. They basically